This will be the most significant win for the left in the history of US politics.
If you are on the kind of the business side of New York, you think this is a man who's going to bankrupt your city and it's all working pretty well. And please don't touch the transport system. Please don't touch, the housing market. Please don't start offering huge amounts of subsidy for childcare. The city can't afford it. If you are somebody who has felt completely ignored by the establishment over generations and decades, you probably think, finally, thank God somebody is listening to what we need.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily. And we should start with a caveat because we know and love elections and we know and love surprises. And
there's only one poll that matters.
There is only one poll that matters, as every single politician ever has said. But we are a week out now and early voting has already begun. In other words, you can go and vote, postal vote, and put your vote in a ballot if you are eligible in New York City. And currently, the betting markets, the poly markets, are reckoning there is a 92% of Zohran Mamdani, the Ugandan-born Muslim mayoral candidate, winning New York, which would be a seismic shift, right? I mean, a hurricane.
Yeah.
And there are other candidates, and we are going to get round to those other candidates. And there are other flavours of Democrat that also look like they could be victorious in their own elections. But right now, all eyes are on Mamdani, to the point where even Fox News was asking if he had this one in the bag. So he mentions Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo was the former governor who was disgraced after allegations of sexual harassment, removed him from his job. It was astonishing, really, to see him trying to make a comeback and trying to gain the Democratic ticket. He didn't. He's running as an independent. And Eric Adams, who was the former mayor, also disgraced for fraud allegations, has now pulled out. And another candidate representing the Republican Party, who's kind of weirdly gained a sort of niche following on TikTok and Insta, is called Curtis Sliwa. He goes around everywhere with a red beret. But none of them seem to be making the inroads that would represent a serious challenge to Mamdani now. And so Democrats are starting to get not just excited, but possibly overawed by the idea that this is what the Democratic Party should look like, will look like, is going to look like in 2025.
Look, you have to be lucky in who your opponents are.
Big time.
And I think that Zohran Mamdani is very lucky that he is against Andrew Cuomo, who, as you say, is kind of seen like this establishment politician. The family have been involved in New York politics for decades, and he had kind of various awful allegations made against him when he was the governor of New York State. But beyond that, you can't take away from the fact that if Mamdani wins next week, this will be the most significant win for the left in the history of US politics. I mean, Bernie Sanders...
The left of the left.
Yeah, the left
Not
of the left.
Not just the Democrats, but the progressive left.
There have been other politicians in America who have self-identified as socialist. Bernie Sanders, the senator in Vermont, does that. But he is he's a senator in the Senate. This is someone who is going to be leading New York City, the preeminent financial capital of the US. And that will be something that is going to galvanise politics. And so, people are excited on the Democratic side, and they're also terrified because establishment Democrats kind of are more comfortable with people who can cozy up to the billionaires, who've got good relations with Wall Street, who speak the same language as business. Yeah. And Zohran Mamdani is gaining his support and his electoral strength from grassroots and grassroots upwards.
Yeah, and his rallying cry there is, as you just heard, New York is not for sale. So his policies have caught a lot of public attention. One, he wants to do free bus fares in a whole city, could cost up to $1 billion. It's not cheap, but he's promising that. He wants to freeze rents in New York. A lot of New York rentals go up year on year, which makes it almost impossible impossibly unaffordable. And the other thing he's talked about is these grocery stores, state-run grocery stores, which has had everyone running around saying, oh, it's going to be like Cuba, it's going to be like the Soviet Union. He's actually only talking about 5 of those stores in the whole of New York. And in my mind, I guess they are more like a sort of food bank equivalent where the prices are kept low. And if you want to find state-sponsored, low-cost groceries, you have to go and find one of these 5 stores. I don't think it's a takeover of every shopping mile in America.
And the other big platform is childcare, universal childcare.
Universal childcare. So it's expensive, in other words.
Yeah.
So if you are on the kind of the business side of the sort of centre-right, business right of New York, you think this is a man who's going to bankrupt your city, and it's all working pretty well. And please don't touch the transport system. Please don't touch, the housing market. Please don't start offering huge amounts of subsidy for childcare. The city can't afford it. If you are somebody who has felt completely ignored by the establishment over generations and decades, you probably think, finally, thank God somebody is listening to what we need.
But if you look at it in the context of a European social democratic model, you kind of think, why are people getting so worried? Why is their hair on fire at the moment over it? Because in American politics, it is quite different, and it's for New York City. Again, underline New York City. And this is why people in America are thinking, this is a leap into the socialist unknown.
Yeah, and his position on Israel-Palestine.
Yes.
He has been much less of an advocate for Israel and its activities than many in American politics have been, even those within the Democratic Party. And it's been interesting to see how, I'm going to say reluctant or slow, some of the sort of senior establishment Democrats have been to align themselves with him. I think, not least over that issue. Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have been much more wary, I think, of giving him their endorsement until very late on in the race.
And Mamdani himself has had to kind of, shift quite a bit on some of the positions that were taken earlier. And I heard an interview he did the other day where he was talking about Israel. Would you go to Israel? No, he wouldn't go to Israel, he was saying. But he said, there are a lot of countries I'm not going to go to because I'm going to be mayor of New York. I'm not a foreign policy person. And I thought, actually, you need to work your line out a bit better on that, because just to say, well, it's not going to arise because, I'm just going to be focusing on New York is not a satisfactory answer. Does he believe that Israel has a right to exist and defend itself? And, if so, what does that look like? I think those are questions he hasn't answered. But again, it shows that politics in America is changing. And, his attitude towards Israel and the fact that he's likely to win the election is one of those things, and also a policy platform which is much more radical than the Democratic Party has dared to do. And he's also a brilliant communicator.
Yeah, he is. But I think it's important to put this in context as well, because Mamdani is fighting for New York mayor, and that is getting all the airtime, that is getting all the energy. He's an exciting candidate for many who want to see this kind of progressive politics on the left. But there are other races going on next week with Democrats who may also triumph in their own spaces, in their own field, which offer a very, very different type of Democratic politician. One is Abigail Spanberger. I remember interviewing her when she first went for her House seat in Virginia. She now wants to become Virginia governor. She's on the sort of centre-right of the party. She used to work for the CIA. She is a totally different colour, totally different stripe to Mamdani. In a Virginia race, which is very different to New York. And she could triumph there and give Democrats on the centre-right cause to think, well, actually, that's what the future looks like. There's another guy in Nebraska called Dan Osborne. People are getting very excited about Dan Osborne. Again, somebody who is weirdly much more aligned with somebody like Trump on immigration than much of the Democratic Party. So I think there is also a danger that you sort of leapfrog over, oh, this is what the Democratic Party has to look like for the next 5 years. It may not be. It may just be that New York is an outlier and this is what works here right now.
Look, attitudes in southern Virginia
Yeah.
Where there used to be tobacco plantations and all the rest of it is going to be very different.
And the
the
CIA
metropolitan New York State. I mean, the CIA headquarters is right by the side of, it's on the Washington edge of Virginia. But go to Southern Virginia, it's a completely different place and very different from New York. America is not one country, it's many different countries. But nonetheless, what's happening in New York is significant.
We'll be back in a moment speaking to a very good friend, an old friend of Zohran Mamdani's, Ross Barkan. Well, joining us now is Ross Barkan. He's the journalist and author, editor-in-chief of the Metropolitan Review. He has known Zohran Mamdani for nearly a decade, and I guess in another world or another sort of parallel world, Ross, you might have been running his campaign. He ran yours originally.
Yes, he did. So many years ago, I made a pivot to politics and I ran for state senate in New York City, in Brooklyn, where I grew up. And he was my campaign manager. So we spent many, many months together. And I saw him up close when he was just a anonymous but very well-regarded organizer. So it's been exciting for me to see him rise all the way. We'll see perhaps to the top if it looks that way. But election hasn't happened yet.
So I guess you're sort of politically close and politically aligned. When we're looking a week out from the election, the poly markets, the betting markets suggest a 92% victory for Mamdani at this point. You would be, just to sort of categorise this for our listeners who are maybe coming to this race for, the first or second time, you think it is very unlikely that Mamdani would lose the New York mayoral?
It's unlikely. Listen, there have been shock upsets before. Zohran Mamdani authored his own upset of Andrew Cuomo in the primary. I think there's a lot going for him this time around, and Cuomo is a very damaged candidate. I think it's two factors are true simultaneously in this race. Mamdani is a once-in-a-generation talent. He's exciting people. And also Cuomo is a disgraced former governor who could theoretically have a path to victory against a 34-year-old socialist assemblyman, but he's finding it hard to close the gap, even though he's moved up in the polls. It's difficult to see what his actual path to victory would be, but you never know in these things. But I do think that the betting markets reflect the reality that Zohran Mamdani is the heavy favorite.
So I'm sure a lot of people, as Emily says, are coming to Zohran Mamdani kind of relatively new. They've heard maybe a bit about him, that he's running for mayor, that he's a bit different from a lot of people who have gone before in that role. As you know him, please tell us more, because 34, socialist, Muslim, he's not exactly cut in the same mould as other people who've held the mayoralty of New York City.
He's not at all. If you look at who becomes mayor, typically they're ladder climbing politicians who spent many years in the trenches, or in the case of Michael Bloomberg, he was extremely wealthy and a known businessman. The thing about Zohran Mamdani is he actually shares a fair amount in common with another unlikely politician, that was Barack Obama. When Obama was running for president, they said many of the same things they say about Zohran Mamdani right now. He's inexperienced. He has a thin resume. No one like him's ever been president. America can't vote for a man with a strange name, a foreign-sounding name, who's also black. This country cannot do it. And of course they did. So I think with someone like Zohran Mamdani, yes, he is completely outside of any conception of what a New York City mayor it could be, but he's on the cusp. And knowing him personally, I'll say he's very competent. He's more competent than he seems. He's very focused. He's extremely hardworking, and he's bright. He's got a high IQ, and I think those things all matter. If you say, do you want someone who's experienced but is less capable, someone who's not experienced and more capable? Right now I think New Yorkers are leaning towards someone who is exciting, who is new, who is fresh, who is capable. And of course, as mayor, he's going to have many challenges, and no one knows what type of mayor he'll be. But I can say that the talent is there, certainly, to succeed.
Yeah, Ross, I get the point you make about the sort of similarities with Barack Obama, the excitement, the foreign-sounding name, the colour of the skin, and all the rest of it. But isn't a big distinguishing feature that actually Zohran Mamdani is a lot further to the left than Barack Obama was not describing himself as a socialist when he was, a state congressman in Springfield, Illinois.
He was not pro-Palestine either. For sure. I mean, Zohran Mamdani in some ways embodies all the fear-mongering around Obama. My little joke is, Zohran is the Muslim socialist born in Africa, which they all said about Obama. So certainly he exists on the left spectrum. At the same time, if you look at his actual policies and what he's campaigning on, within the New York City context, they're not radical at all. He's calling for free buses, which is something Michael Bloomberg wanted to do. He's calling for a rent freeze on rent stabilized apartments, something the prior mayor Bill de Blasio did. 5 city-run grocery stores, which would be new, but there's only 5 of them. And universal childcare, something that most Democrats support. It's just very expensive. So when you actually break down the platform, it's not so radical. But he's exciting people who self-identify as socialists, and he himself identifies that way. He believes in a sort of social democracy, a strong social safety net, the things that Europeans often take for granted. So I think, yes, he presents to the left of Obama, and I think on foreign policy he certainly is. But look, he's not going to be president. So when you actually look at the platform, it's fairly achievable as platforms go.
I think you've said something quite interesting, which is that for a European model, he doesn't particularly strike listeners to anything that out of the ordinary. We sort of get a lot of stuff on the welfare state. We believe in healthcare. We believe in subsidized travel and all the rest of it. I guess there are a couple of phrases that have dogged him, that have followed him around, some of which he's sort of had to spend a long time re-explaining or casting off. One was about defunding the police. That was in the days following the murder of George Floyd. And I think he, at the time, called the New York police racist and homophobic. And the other was this phrase that was used, globalize the intifada, which has got a lot of particularly sort of older Jewish Americans or older pro-Israel Americans really concerned that he sees a world order in which, the state of Israel doesn't exist.
Well, I'd say it's half true. He never used the phrase globalized intifada. He was asked about it on a podcast, and then he had to talk about why certain groups saw it as a slogan of liberation, so to speak. And he backed away from that. But I'd say globalized intifada has not been part of his rhetorical toolkit at any point. Defund the police was. There's no doubt a lot of progressives and leftists were for defunding the police in 2020 have now backed away. He certainly has pivoted on that flip-flop, whatever you want to say, and now he's not for it anymore. And yes, he's had to contend with that. And that is the reality of politics. And he said repeatedly he doesn't want to defund them. He wants to have a nonviolent mental health responders work with the police, which I think makes sense, and this model has been used in other cities. But in terms of the rhetoric, some he's uttered and he must account for that, and some he's not. Some has been, I would argue, quite unfair. And I think for Jewish New Yorkers, listen, if you are a Zionist, if you are an Israel hawk, it's a tough time politically for you, because the political establishment in America is no longer completely aligned around the goals of the Israeli government, and I don't think it should be. But he's not anti-Semitic, I can say that. And he's said repeatedly he's going to denounce anti-Semitism and protect Jewish New Yorkers, but that doesn't mean compromising your beliefs around Palestine. It doesn't mean you neglect the struggle that the people in Gaza and the West Bank are having. So that's something, listen, Jewish New Yorkers are divided on this too. Younger Jewish New Yorkers like Mamdani, older ones who are very pro-Israel don't. And the Jewish community of New York is not a monolith. There's Hasidic Jews, Orthodox Jews, progressive younger Jews. It's a real mix. And he's going to get a lot of those votes. He's not getting all of them. And for some who believe in unstinting support for Netanyahu and the Israeli government, he's not going to be their mayor. That's just the fact.
It's interesting the language that his critics have used about him being a danger and laying a lot at his feet, it seems primarily for being Muslim.
Yeah, well, look, he's not a danger to Jewish New Yorkers or New Yorkers in general. The worst that happens is he tries and fails to implement these policies that I just talked about. Some of which are expensive, some of which are not. The city will churn onward. Business will be business. He can't expropriate wealth. He can't seize the means of production. So, what is this danger, right? And it's all very ethereal. There's no actual danger.
Do you think it's race based, or do you think it is genuinely coming from people who think he's going to bankrupt New York?
I think it's a mix. Look, I think there are people who are very pro-business and who are either wealthy or conservative who don't believe in his policies, and they're allowed to oppose them. Now, I think anyone who has a brain in their head and actually has examined them can see these will not destroy the fiscal situation, will not ruin the fiscal situation in any way. Some are expensive and some might be done in piecemeal. I mean, you look at the history of New York City policy, it's about negotiation, right? He wants a $6 billion child care program. Maybe it starts at 3, maybe it starts at 2, maybe he haggles with the governor. But I think the bigger picture, right, about the other fears, that the fears of a young Muslim socialist, I do think there's Islamophobia there, absolutely. Now, I don't think most New Yorkers feel that way, but I do think there's a minority that looks at someone with a beard, with darker skin, and thinks that's not the mayor I want. And he's going to install Sharia law in New York City. And of course he is not. And he's going to be a, progressive humanist mayor. But people, people are going to do what they're going to do. And that's also politics.
Why do you think Donald Trump is so exercised about the possibility of Mamdani in City Hall?
Well, they are great foils. Listen, I think anytime there's another charismatic politician on the opposite end of the political spectrum, Donald Trump becomes very obsessive and becomes very pugilistic. He sees Zohran Mamdani. Zohran Mamdani embodies all of these things he's against. I do wonder if there's a part of Trump that sees a bit of his own appeal, his own movement. I mean, I think Mamdani and Trump are extremely different politically, but I wrote about this in the New Statesman, actually. There are real similarities in how they bowled over their respective political establishments. I mean, Donald Trump was not wanted by any of the Republicans at the top of the party. He had to defeat them, and he had to take over the party. And Zohran Mamdani is in the process of doing the same thing. Zohran Mamdani can pack out arenas as well. So there's a part of Trump, I wonder, that sees a bit of his own movement in reverse, sort of the mirror.
I think that's such an interesting point. Maybe this is a crazy analogy to make, so bear with me. But it seemed to me that in Israel, it suited Netanyahu to have Hamas as these extreme opponents. And it might suit Donald Trump as well to have a Zohran Mamdani in City Hall in New York to draw contrasts.
I think he's looking forward to that. Yes, he can point at, even though I don't think Mamdani's actual policies and governance will be that radical. For example, he's about to appoint, or says he will appoint if he wins, the current police commissioner, Jessica Tisch, who is supported by the business interest and Rupert Murdoch. But yes, I think the fact that you have a young Muslim, young socialist, DSA, in charge of New York City, look, that's a foil for him. The Republicans are going to do it. They're going to villainize him, and they make
Sure.
boogeymen and boogie women out of many Democrats. I'll say that.
And do you think it helps Mamdani? If you're enraging Donald Trump to that extent, then young progressive people are probably going to think, well, yeah, give me Mamdani.
It can, for sure. You saw this in LA when Trump dispatched the National Guard, and the mayor there, Karen Bass, confronted them very directly and stood up to them. And at the time, she was deeply unpopular because of the LA wildfires. It looked like she was going to get driven out of office. And now her approval rating has risen quite a bit. A lot of Angelenos liked that they had a mayor with a backbone who really was able to confront Trump directly. So yes, I think Mamdani, on one hand, the Republicans can make him the boogeyman and benefit politically, but they have to understand within New York City, he might benefit too.
Ross, I don't want us to get ahead of our skis. We're still a week out from the election. And as you say, anything can happen. But there is a chance, isn't there, that if Mamdani sees victory on November the 4th, that the Democrats, the sort of the lost souls of the Democratic Party, will start thinking this is the blueprint from now on. And this is the way we have to fight from now on. And some of that might be right for a city like New York, and some of it will probably be completely wrong. And we're seeing sort of, other parts of the country where much more conservative Democrats are likely to succeed, in Virginia or in Nebraska. And I wonder if you think that this is a sort of a critical point. I mean, is the Democratic Party sort of trying to decide its soul based on what happens in New York in the next few weeks?
Well, it's a big country, right? And it's true, a Democrat running in Nebraska or running in Iowa is different than a Democrat running in New York City. But what I'll say is the lessons from his campaign, if he indeed wins, is that messaging matters. Mamdani had a relentless focus on affordability. He was speaking to people's direct concerns. Kamala Harris and the Democrats last year ran away from inflation. They ran away from economics in many ways. They didn't have a real message around that at all. Trump did, and Trump won. So, message discipline, regardless of your ideology, matters. And the ability to excite people matters. The ability to bring people into the political process. So sure, not the policies he's running on don't exist everywhere and can't be implemented everywhere. But the actual techniques and the actual ways he goes about communicating certainly can serve as a blueprint. And I do think the smarter Democrats, even the centrists, get that. They understand there's something here and you've got to stand for something. The Democratic Party has not stood for much lately.
Just dig into that with me. So what excites people? I mean, is that just about the message? Could he sell any policies with the right message and the right social media strategy and the right kind of honesty of tone? Or do you think it is about what he's actually offering? I guess that's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
It's about it's both. It's about what he's offering, though. You can't just do slick social media and TikToks and Instagram around boring, unappealing policy. Little incremental bits. You're not going to win that way. Obama did win that way. So you need the policy. You have to have the policy core. Without the core, none of it matters. Then you've got to sell it, right? And he's been great at selling it. He is very charismatic. He's great with social media. He's got a great team around him. And he's been able to penetrate those alternative channels and then do well with traditional media too, because that matters. But I do think, you can't make the mistake and go, well, any politician with a great TikTok campaign can win. It's not true. It's got to be what you're about.
The kids are all following Sliwa now, right? The kids are all following Curtis Sliwa now because he runs around with a red beret and he's kind of pretty good on TikTok. You don't think that is going to translate to, a vote winner for him, right?
Probably some. I mean, ironically, I think a lot of them like him. The people on the left like him. Ironically, if there were a ranked choice vote, maybe he'd get the number 2 vote. So realistically, the people who think Sliwa is funny, ironically, are just going to vote for Mamdani. I think most of them.
So let me ask you this because, okay, let's start measuring the curtains. Let's assume he wins next week. How significant a victory is it for the left in America? I mean, you've had Bernie Sanders as, the senator in Vermont who describes himself as a democratic socialist for a long time. And there have been other people in kind of state senates and whatever else who have declared themselves like this. But for Zohran Mamdani to win New York City, is this a moment of kind of, which people will look back on and think, this is fundamentally important. This is when the Democratic Party changed?
Look, for the progressive and socialist left, it's extremely significant. Never has a socialist identifying politician won an executive office as big as this one. And never has the newer, the post 2016 left under Bernie, never hasn't won any office like this. AOC won a congressional seat. Bernie was a competitive presidential candidate in 2 elections. He won states, but he could not seize the nomination. I mean, New York City would be one of the 20 largest states in America, maybe in the top 15. So it's enormous victory. The executive powers of the office are very real and tangible. And the left has mostly been on the legislative side. They've been on the proposal side. They've been kind of on the sidelines, yelling for things and agitating for things. It's a bit like when had Corbyn become the prime minister. It's a bit like that. Had Corbyn actually gotten over the top. So if Mamdani indeed gets there, it's a big deal. You cannot understate what it means, and we're going to find out what happens next. There's no guarantees of great success, but the victory on its own is historically significant.
Are you saying that Mamdani is America's Jeremy Corbyn?
I'm saying to an extent, I think he's more talented than Corbyn, and I think he's been better at appealing to a broader range of people. But yeah, I think Corbyn exists on the left flank of his party, who's able to become the head of the Labour Party, could not win now, could not, of course, defeat Johnson or Theresa May. But no, I mean, there are similarities. They're both very pro-Palestine, put it that way. I think Mamdani is, I think he's more of a people person. I think he's able to bring in knit together larger coalitions. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely Corbyn Mamdani similarities.
Ross Barkan, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So it's 3 years to go till the next presidential election, and Donald Trump is already talking about how he might have a third term. Now, one of the cute ways in which people have started talking about how this could be possible, because the 22nd Amendment makes clear you can only have 2 terms as president, is that Donald Trump runs as, say, I don't know, for example, J.D. Vance's vice president. The election takes place, Donald Trump becomes the vice president, and then J.D. Vance says, I'm going to resign now. And of course,
the Putin-Medvedev trick. Basically.
Exactly. And then Donald Trump takes over. Hey presto, he is in the presidency and back in the White House for a third term. Except he hasn't said that. He says he won't do that, but he's still interested in some way of still being the president.
I think the thing you have to understand about that whole ramble is that Trump is the world's biggest troll, and the people he's actually trolling there are not really the Democrats or the American people or, the electorate who would get up in arms about him breaking the Constitution and running for a third term. It's all the ones that actually are hoping that they will get the nomination after him, right? It is specifically J.D. Vance, but also presumably
Marco Rubio
and, anyone else who's thinking, well, is there space for me in the race in 2028? And he's already got the MAGA hats made that read Trump 2028, and he's doing it to his own side. They're the ones that are getting really frustrated with all this stuff, because at some point he either has to decide that he is, going full Putin autocrat and he's actually going to railroad through the Constitution and literally run again, or, not run again, but just stay in the office as he tried to do 4 years ago in 2020, or else he's kind of got to back somebody. And there's nothing Trump loves more than a beauty contest. That's what he's setting up here.
But it's also, as you rightly say, Emily, he is trolling his own kind of key people beneath him who would hope to be the next president. But he's simultaneously putting the fear of God into the 9 members of the Supreme Court who undoubtedly would have to rule on this. And they have shown a marked reluctance to ever stand up to Donald Trump so far.
I mean, Amy
and it would
Coney
be the biggest constitutional test of the United States if Donald Trump says, I am running again.
Amy Coney Barrett has explicitly said that cannot happen in the Constitution. So there is no complicated response to this. It cannot happen if you want the American Constitution to stand. But we have also seen that he does things that are unconstitutional, Monday to Friday, with a bit of time at the weekend as well. So I guess this is why people sort of start going, well, that could never happen because, that would break the Constitution. And you end up in a space which is like, oh, he's done it again.
There was a British politician of whom it was said, you can't believe a word he says and you can't ignore a word he says. And Donald Trump is that person right now. You can't ignore this.
Who was it?
That was, oh, golly. It was a Conservative politician. It was Rab Butler. It was said of Rab Butler that you can't, 1960s senior Conservative politician, it was said that you can't believe a word he says and you can't ignore a word he says.
Sounds quite quaint nowadays, doesn't it?
It does. It does. We'll be back next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents USA.